Welcome everybody, I'm Rob Scott from UC Today and welcome to another one of our panel discussions. Today we're going to delve into the world of artificial intelligence and the use cases of AI in UC, collaboration and customer experience. So I'm really excited to be joined by a panel of leading expert speakers today. So we're just going to start with some quick introductions. So welcome Kevin.
Well, thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Kevin Kieller. I'm the co-founder of Enable UC. We work with enterprise organizations to help them effectively implement collaboration and communication technologies.
Great, thanks Kevin. Welcome John.
Okay, hi Scott. Thanks for having me and us here. So I'm Jon Arnold. I am an independent analyst in Toronto. So we've got two here based in the north of the border looking at this market. So I've been independent for about 15 years and I focus primarily on collaboration, which means a million things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And AI is, becoming attached to that almost overnight, and so that's got to be part of the conversation in almost everything I look at now.
Great, thanks John. And Zeus?
Hi, I'm Zeus Kerravala. I'm the founder and principal analyst. I'm another independent analyst with my own firm, ZK Research. I've been doing that about 8 years. Prior to that, I was the chief research officer at Yankee Group for about 10 years. And my coverage area is not as, well defined as maybe Kevin and John, where I tend to focus on emerging technology within a broader set of networking and communications tools. But certainly artificial intelligence has become a big part of the research almost across the board. So.
Great, thanks, Zeus. And
yeah.
So let's get started. The first question I think we were going to ask was, how is AI being most commonly used in communications? So when I say communications, I mean UC, unified communications, collaboration and customer experience or contact center technology. And I'd like to push that one to Kevin to start with, please.
Yeah, great. That's a great question because it's, AI is being embedded in everywhere with respect to collaboration and communication. I spend most of my time in the Microsoft ecosystem, a lot because enterprise organizations seem to be moving strongly in that direction. And so if we look at how Microsoft is embedding, things like live captioning, so speech to text, in their Teams product. I mean, it's been available in PowerPoint. We see, live translation capabilities. Things like just simple things that you may not even realize, like when it's auto correcting spelling, all of that is based on AI. And I think what Microsoft is trying to do is to really leverage their huge bundle proposition with Office 365, or more broadly Microsoft 365, and certainly behind the scenes as you use all of the Office tools, there's this graph which is keeping track of all your interactions, and then they're serving up, that type of information, the artificial intelligence, looking for patterns. So, for example, My Analytics gives you some insights into how you're spending your time, who are your top collaborators, what emails are you opening, what emails are other people opening. So, they're really using that graph and all the signaling. I think that they receive about 420 billion interactions in Microsoft Office every month. And then they, use that to refine the machine learning models and try to help you use AI, and surf that up to you in ways that you in many respects, you may not even realize that that's happening. We can delve into, more specific use cases, but as an overview, certainly in the Microsoft ecosystem, AI is pretty much in everything that you touch, and increasingly, I think they're testing out new use cases.
Thanks, Kevin. John, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that speaks, I think, where Kevin's coming from to what the workplace environment is starting to look like. And I think we'll get into this a bit, the distinction between what's being used and what's being offered and what's being cooked up that we haven't even seen yet. I think those are all different strands. And to Kevin's point, a lot of it's just being pushed into the background It's transparent to everything we do. And if we woke up and said, I didn't realize AI was touching so many things, you might start thinking twice about some of these things because it's so pervasive and so out there, but not really in front of you. So that's another conversation to have about what the true benefit of this AI capability is going to be. But I just want to steer over, because you mentioned CX, Rob. Enterprise, I think the applications, when you say commonly used, I think it's pretty limited right now. I think the vendors can bring in a lot of capabilities. But I think the most visible thing, of course, would be the desktop with Alexa, right? The personal digital assistants, whatever you want to call them. But that is starting to make its way into the workplace, which signifies the shift of person-to-person communication to person-to-machine, right? Where we're now engaging with a device that is going to fulfill our orders and commands, etc. So the use cases, and Isaiah sees the same things, it would be in meeting room, right? I mean, that's the easiest low-hanging fruit thing that we can attach ourselves to that says, that's what AI looks like. And I think that has a lot of benefits. Some of it is very basic stuff, like start the meeting, turn the lights on, invite this person in. That's okay. But I think the CX space is really where there's much more application, because I think the business value there is just so much more evident, right? Because now we start getting into the whole customer care, customer engagement space where, okay, they need more automation to handle the volumes, keep their costs down, make agents more effective. And that's a whole other topic to itself. But I think there's more immediate business value. So I think that's where we're seeing more application of it today. And that gets us into a chatbot conversation, self-service conversation. And that's the whole, ecosystem of the contact center vendors. And I'm going to stop now because I think everything we're touching on, everybody here could talk about all day long. Over to you, Zeus.
Yeah. Well, I think to answer your question, it's like where's it being used? It's not really. I mean, Kevin touched on a few examples, and so did John, and I think meeting room's a good example. And I think of all the things that are possible with AI, and I think if anybody's gone to Enterprise Connect or to the UC Expo show, right, we saw lots and lots of things that are possible. But what's actually being delivered today is a very small subset of that. I think the Hey Alexa, the Hey WebEx type of model, and some of the stuff Microsoft's doing. If you look at that where it's been used most commonly today is really speech recognition, and that's something actually that's pretty notable because speech rec's been around a long time. It's just not worked very well, for the first 15 years that we had it, and a lot of people got pretty frustrated. And I think it was the rise of the consumer vendors that brought things like Alexa and Google and things into our house that actually made it somewhat usable and made the enterprise vendors focus more on that. I think I've seen some other examples where, in the contact center space, more companies are trying to use intelligent bots. That's another example where you're doing some sort of natural language translation. There's some companies experiment with UC IoT integration. And I think if we were to do this even a year from now, I think the capabilities will be much greater. And I think today we're really just scratching the surface with a lot of the primary thing. I think is really that speech recognition to make it easier for the users to interact with the meeting room technology. But there's lots and lots of other stuff coming, and I think if we've gone to any number of vendor trade shows, we've all seen examples of being able to use augmented reality to superimpose whose people's names are and what our interest levels are and things like that. But I think 2020 will be actually a big year for AI being involved in it. And I think to John's point, the area where there's the biggest upside is actually on the CX side with contact center. I think there's such a battle today to provide a better customer experience. And that doesn't come from training your agents better. It comes from being able to deliver better information to your agents through the use of AI. And that's another area, again, where there's a little of that being done, but we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to push back a little bit, Zeus, because I think that I think for sure there's more capabilities that are being leveraged, but I do think that the speech to text, that's what you see. But for example, if you do a search in Microsoft Office, I mean, it's using and I've taken a picture of a receipt. It's using AI to know it's a receipt, and now I can find things. If I had sushi, I can find that. So there it's using image rec, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a billion slides, if communication includes meetings and presentations, there's been 1 billion PowerPoint slides that people have taken the AI recommendation in terms of making them look better, right? So I think that there's a lot of AI that is already being used and people don't even know it, to your point, John. But certainly, to your point, Zeus, lots of capabilities untapped still.
In fact, if you're to take Rob's question and break it down, what are the areas of AI that are most mature? Speech rec's one of them.
Yes.
Video recognition is actually one of them. And when I was at a Cisco Emerging Tech Day, they were showing how they could mute out certain sounds. It's interesting the way they do that is they convert the sound to an image and do image recognition. Right.
Interesting.
So a dog has a certain speech pattern versus a person versus a car. And so they actually convert all their audio to images, and then they do, because video or image recognition is so mature within the confines of AI. So when you look at the things that are being used, it's those areas of AI that are actually fairly mature, like speech and image.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to add, Rob, I'd like to add too, for the audience, I know we're kind of zeroed in on AI, but everything we're talking about is also part of this kind of broader digital transformation trend. And that gets everybody wants to be on that stream. And hopefully we'll get to this at some point, but a lot of things that we think are AI or think AI can only solve is not necessarily true. So I hope we get to this because there's a lot of hype around AI, of course, and we want to be sure that the audience understands there's a lot of stuff that is mature, like we've been talking about, but there's a lot of stuff that, you could get similar results that aren't necessarily AI, although they kind of look like they might be. But, AI doesn't solve everything. And I get concerned that we put too much faith in this, this buzzword of AI being the solution to a lot of things. And it's because the more we digitize things, like what Kevin's saying, these capabilities are great. You can speech enable all these applications and it's much more efficient. You can scan and search and index information. It's great. And it only happens because these forms are in digital format, right? So we talked about speech rec. So once you digitize speech, the most common mode of communication now gets thrown into that big pool of data. And to Kevin's point, we're creating billions of bytes of data every day. Who the hell knows what to do with it? I mean, we're creating so much data, but how do you translate that into information? And that's where AI starts to become valuable if you have analytics to kind of break it down and make it useful. Because I worry that we're going to create so much of this data because it's part of digital transformation. We're going to need new job titles, new functions, new departments, and that's going to come. I think this is part of how IT is going to reinvent itself in the future, and that's probably a relevant topic for this whole AI issue here.
Well, that's a really good point, John. And I'd like to really express that this session is more to kind of just kind of delve into AI-powered communications, collaboration, and kind of just bring out some of the practical use cases.
Yeah, it's an AI session, John, so stop pushing back on it.
Yeah.
but you're right, it's not a product, is it? It's an enabler. It's a technology that allows us to solve new, to provide new business value and solve outcome, produce outcomes. So this leads me nicely on to the next question. So I'd like to kind of look at the vendors taking advantage of AI, because there are a number of vendors that are, and there's an awful lot that aren't. But let's home in for a moment into the vendor landscape, and who stands out at the moment in terms of capitalizing and embracing AI technology. John, do you want to take that one first?
Well, I'll start at the highest level. AI is driven by the cloud. And so it's not surprisingly, it's really the big four who have the most cloud capability: Amazon, Google, Microsoft with Azure, and even IBM. Right? Those are the biggest cloud players, and it's not surprising that they have probably the most sophisticated across the board AI capabilities. But of course, there's tons of niche players who do only one thing. So, an example would be a company called Gong, G-O-N-G, Gong.io, that they've focused on the sales function as a business case for AI. So that they've developed all these, patterns and algorithms to figure out what top sales performers are doing well, use that, mine that digital data, and find ways to kind of bottle that, so to speak, and make the training more effective for newer salespeople or existing salespeople to be better and have better benchmarks, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really good use case when a vendor is focused on a specific area and said, okay, here's where AI can really provide some very tangible business value. And I think that's and I think we're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing, these niche applications that play off of this broader AI toolkit.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I think from a UC vendor perspective, really every vendor is using some form of AI. I think, Kevin described how Microsoft's using it, and of course, Microsoft uses it to make sure the Microsoft ecosystem works better together. I mean, you could say the same thing for Cisco, right? Where they've used it is in their meeting room technology, where they've got they probably have a broader set of hardware and endpoints than any other vendor out there. And so what they've tried to do is make that ecosystem work better. And I think that's more and more common is what you'll see is the vendors using AI as a way to tie their stuff together to make it work better. But there isn't a vendor that on the UC side that isn't at least using it to some extent. We're using Zoom here. Zoom's integrated a company called Otter.ai for transcription capabilities. They've got virtual backgrounds now, that uses AI as a way to, drown out light and things like that. I think one of the interesting aspects, Rob, though, of AI is that I think over time, every deployment becomes either cloud-based or hybrid cloud. And so even if you look at a lot of the larger enterprises, the companies like Kevin and I work for, with, and I'm sure John does too, to some extent, a lot of them still prefer to have their deployments on-prem, or at least have the data on-prem. But even in that case, I think the AI capabilities will have to be driven out of the cloud. And so almost by definition, almost every deployment will become, some sort of hybrid deployment. And I think that's an interesting avenue for companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft that actually have the AI toolkits to insert themselves into other vendors' ecosystems. Because most of the other vendors, Cisco is a little bit, but once you get down below that, most of the smaller UC vendors, they don't have the capabilities to build their own AI toolkits. So they're leveraging third parties. And that'll create an interesting dynamic because in a lot of ways you're bringing your competitor in with you. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch and see how many of the smaller vendors try and create almost an ecosystem of multiple AI vendors around them to deliver the same kind of capabilities that a larger vendor can natively.
Yeah, I think Zeus, you hit on an important piece that I just want to call out, which is, I think when you look at Amazon, you look at Google, you look at Microsoft, and to a lesser degree, you look at IBM. Those organizations provide all the toolkits as well. So, I think that it's interesting to then, with your point around Cisco, like certainly the whole cognitive communication, I mean, a big focus on AI. I think, you raised an interesting point is, who do they bring in from a toolkit perspective? And certainly it's interesting to watch. Google's done a good job of making some AI tools available to people, but certainly deeply embedding it into their communications products, as has Microsoft and Amazon is trying to do as well. So I think it is going to be interesting in the marketplace to see how, to your point, Zeus, how smaller organizations that have to choose AI, and they can't, you can't really go out and hire, like, unless you're a Google or an Amazon or Microsoft, it is very difficult now to hire the top leading talent in that space.
Yeah.
So if you're a smaller company, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the market and the consolidation.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because when I remember talking with Rich McBee when he was running Mitel about this, that they actually tried to go out and hire their own AI people, and then they realized that even if they could hire one or two. And so they made the decision to actually go use, the Amazon and the Google toolkit things, right, to go drive their AI, and that's actually not a bad strategy. Those toolkits are there, right? I think Cisco will be a little different, and they'll go buy a bunch of companies like they have been doing, because they got the dollars to do it. But once you get below that line, I think almost everybody has to leverage one of the existing AI vendors
who may be competing with them.
Yeah. Well, look what Google did with conversational AI, right? They tied up just about every vendor in the space in one fell swoop. It was almost like a Godfather, consolidating power move. They got everybody in there, and now Amazon's left out, and now they have to partner with Salesforce. So it's interesting how these moves start to impact the vendor landscape, and we're far from done here. but it's those big ecosystems that are driving so much of this. It just shows you how intensive this space is. I mean, AI is complicated stuff, and you need big teams of really smart people and programmers to do
well, where it
this.
is, it's the learning segment, right? Having the data. When Amazon's actually gone through their own lessons when they first came out with their own toolkits. They didn't really understand why people weren't using them more, and then they came up with these pre-packaged offering like translation capabilities. And so there was nothing to stop somebody from using the Google or the Amazon toolkit to build their own translation tool, but the amount of data that takes and the amount of time it takes to train the algorithm is it's long, right? Most enterprises can't do that, so they did all that, and now they sell translation as a pre-packaged module, right? Which is different than just here's the Lego blocks, go build it yourself. Right?
Yeah, and surely that's easier for a customer to adopt AI technology if it's pre-packaged, because it sounds like if it's a toolkit, then potentially it's a lot more complex. And that leads me nicely on to my next question, which is how prepared are end customer organizations for AI? Did they need to be prepared, or as you mentioned, this year versus next year, we might be in a very different place. What's your perspective?
I think most aren't prepared. I think they're not even sure really how and where to apply it. There are certain segments within companies where AI has been used. So if you go to the healthcare industry, for instance, and you talk to the people that do like MRI analysis, right? AI has been used there. Although it's, Kevin and I were talking about earlier, that's just a kind of a variant of image recognition, right? So so it's very mature there. When it comes to being used within the collaboration space, I think most customers I've talked to aren't really even sure what's possible, what's capable. How do you really know it's AI? Some companies have experimented with bots in the past and had bad results, and that's because those bots weren't very smart. They were just using basic rules-based systems trying to interpret what people say. And so I think we've gone through these ebbs and flows where customers have tried things that they thought were AI and weren't, and had a bad experience, and now they're a little bit skeptical. And I think where I see the adoption of these tools is like when Kevin was talking about what Microsoft is doing, is when the AI is embedded in there and you almost don't even know it's there, right? But it helps you do your stuff better. That's when you're going to see the uptake. I think if the companies have to like change the way they work and all these things, a good example in the contact center space, Rob, is call routing. Like call routing is a very difficult thing to do in a multi-layer way, because you've got to put together this complex mesh of people's skills and rules and things, right? If an AI can do that behind the scenes and calls just start going to people more efficiently, that's a great win, because it's low friction. Nobody's changing the way they're doing things, but yet things are being done more efficiently, right? And so I think that's a big thing to look at, is from a customer readiness perspective. This needs to be really more embedded in the stuff we already use and make it easier to use, versus having people have to change the way they do things.
Well, and I think you raise a good point, which is, it's really about business outcomes. So, you can apply AI, and of course it can drive bad business outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And then it really doesn't matter if it is AI or not. What I'm encouraged by is the focus on AI, because data is the fuel for AI. It's causing organizations, I think, to undertake good behavior, which is they're starting to keep some of their information around. So, if they, if they're recording all their calls, they're not, maybe even if they're not doing anything with it, they're at least building up this data set, which is good behavior. With enterprise customers, I've spent a whole bunch of time working on analytics to try, and it's not AI, but it's like if they've kept the data around because they were interested in AI, well, then they have this big data set that you can, just do, you can pull it up in Excel and do, provide some good insights that improve business outcomes. And whether it's called AI or not, that's really what people want, is the business outcome. So I think that should be a takeaway for the audience, which is whatever it's called, if it's improving your business, that's a good thing. If you call it AI and you don't see that it's improving your business, you're just spending money on it, that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, Kevin does bring up a good point, though, on the area of sort of data integrity and data health. I think in a lot of cases within companies, we store our data all over the place. And so if you're expecting, with data scientists, it's an axiom, right? Good data leads to good insights. Well, bad data does lead to bad insights, and partial data leads to partial insights. And so we, historically within companies, a lot of our communications tools, a lot of the way we collaborate are completely separate systems with siloed data sets. And so if I'm applying AI to this data set and AI to this data set, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be able to analyze, the cross data. So I think an area companies could be focused on now is how their data is stored and normalized to make sure that when they do want to apply AI to it, it is a common data set that's as broad as
And I
possible.
think that is going to continue to drive the industry consolidation, because if so like if you're using, like Zoom, this is a great tool, but if you're using, you can certainly potentially have different insights if you can also capture other forms of communication. And if that's your giant data lake that you can reason over, likely you can come up with even more powerful outcomes or insights that drive the business outcomes.
Yeah,
exactly. So for me, the big game changer to this, Rob, is cloud and digital transformation. When you look at them together, the economics of cloud are so good, there's no excuse not to capture all this data, because it's not expensive to store it or access it, which a few years ago, that was a big obstacle. But now there's nothing getting in the way of doing that. Now you can create this, as you say, Kevin, a big data lake. Now you have all the data in one place. Then it gets really powerful. Now you can do a lot of things with it. But when you're asking about how prepared end customers are, to Zeus's point, it's like they probably aren't, because they haven't thought enough of this through to see where this is going to go. And for collaboration in particular, the problem that I've always had with this is that we still don't have any good metrics that show productivity outcomes or productivity improvements. All the metrics are focused on operational things that really don't reflect how are we collaborating better, are we getting better decisions, are people involved enough in the process. And I think eventually with analytics, we are going to see a new sets of metrics emerge that will help determine that. So there can be, and it can also be tied to things like social media in terms of the way you apply outcomes from meetings, how information is shared, who's generating the good ideas, are they being adopted, how quickly. There's going to be a whole new wave of these metrics that will help build an ROI for AI to be driving collaboration. Because right now, without those metrics, I think a lot of these enterprises are just guessing. Well, we think as AI says, we'll have an AI app here. Maybe this one is going to work here. You don't know. It's a lot of trial and error. And until you build that, that data set that gets better and better over time, when it's able to predict things and do things that we couldn't normally do before. Cisco talks about this a lot. That's that, cognitive collaboration. When it starts making those processes visibly better, it gets more interesting. But right now, it's at too low a level. So I think, the preparedness of these companies is still pretty low, and they got a long way to go. But it is going to be a lot of trial and error, and you can't go into this with the same expectations of deploying a phone system.
But I think it's an interesting point you raised, John. I've often contended that there was so much focus on, starting a meeting quickly, one button to start a meeting. I think with AI, a lot of the meetings that I get invited to, AI, the better part of the meeting, to make it more effective, it should have just canceled the meeting, because nothing of value, I don't want to start a meeting quickly if it's a terrible meeting without an agenda or whatever. And think of even this session. Wouldn't it be interesting, afterwards, if you record meetings, you can do things like analyze who spoke the most. Was it a well-balanced discussion? You can identify action items and then prompt follow-up. And I think that that's what we'll see in meetings. And hopefully that will mean we have less meetings, because there'll be reminders. So you don't have to have a weekly status meeting to remind everybody every week, like Groundhog Day, the thing that they talked about every week for the past 4 weeks. So I think, I'd like to have less meetings, right?
I actually think what Kevin's touching on is an important point to think about. We do meetings pretty well, right? Once we're in the meeting, most companies do meeting pretty well. It's the pre and post meeting dynamics where I think it's not so well. Like even to the point where we're going to do this webinar, right? And then we're going to go our merry ways, and Rob might ask you something about it later, Kevin, and you may not remember, right? And it would be good if there were an AI could actually, instead of just giving us a transcription, actually maybe summarize what we said, and here are the key points, and here are things, or maybe even write a blog about what we said or something like that, right? So, and even pre-meeting, there's a lot of follow-up that could be done. And in fact, even while I'm talking, why couldn't an AI pop up, perhaps a link to blog I've written or something like that, right? So I think there's lots of things that AI can help with pre and post meeting that most companies really don't do very well today.
Good point.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I suppose we don't know what all those possibilities are just yet, but that again leads me nicely on to my final question, really, in terms of what we might see from vendors this year. Let's look at 2020 for a moment. I'm sure it'll be a very different 2021, but you guys are all very close to the vendors and the innovators within the industry. So from your perspective, what do you expect to see? Any insights there?
Yeah, what I'm really excited about actually is what's going on in the meeting room space to make, well, in the two areas, right? So we're going to see lots of evolution in contact center and in meetings. And I think one of the interesting aspects of meetings is virtual meetings. We've always positioned it as something that's almost as good as being there. But if we have the right AI technology, it's possible that the virtual meeting becomes better than being there. Because now if all of a sudden up on my screen pops Rob Scott, who you work for, where you worked before, it gives me some background. Maybe every time Kevin talks, it gives me a link to something he wrote and I can read it while he's talking. Now I'd be incented to be on a virtual meeting even when I'm sitting across the table from him, because the virtual meeting is now better than actually the physical meeting because I have more information. It's a lot like if you're an NFL football fan and you watch NFL Red Zone. If you're sitting in the stands, all you see is the game. But if you're watching it on TV, you've got this constant feed of information coming in that actually makes the experience better. And I think that's an interesting aspect of it. And I think the other area in the CX side is I actually think we'll see the agent become more valuable. I think a lot of the AI technology we've had has been used to almost diminish the value of the agent, and you can talk to bots and you can talk to automated systems. But I can tell you, if you look across any age demographic, when people want to talk about something important like their health or money, right, they don't want to talk to a robot. They want to talk to people. And at that moment, the agent has to have the right information. And I think from that aspect, an AI being able to feed the right info, make the right recommendations to the agent, actually we'll see the value of the agent rise. They won't be used as often, but when they are, they'll have better information. And so now all of a sudden we're getting into an area where we're doing the things we were doing before. We're just doing them much, much better than we could before. So
yeah, really interesting. Kevin, what's your perspective?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll kind of go back to where I spend most of my time in the Microsoft ecosystem. I certainly think you're going to see the continued march and integration of all the data sets that Microsoft has and exposing this. So, in Microsoft Teams, which is, kind of the thing that they're the rah, champion that they're focusing on as the hub to bring everything together. I think it almost weekly and certainly monthly, you see things like the captions rolling out, the automatic translation is slowly getting in there. Now all meetings recorded are searchable and surfaced. I think you're going to see some, they did virtual backgrounds. You're going to start to see experimentation with tracking people's engagement. They have a thing called workplace analytics that already tracks engagement. So if Zeus is sending emails now during the meeting, you, in an anonymized fashion, like let's say you're a leader doing a town hall, you get a good understanding that there's a lot of IM volume going on while you're talking, or a lot of emails going on, which maybe not, something that you want. So I think we're going to, Microsoft is going to continue to harvest all of those billions of signals that they're collecting. And they're very careful about it because, for example, with my analytics, they make sure like it's all GDPR, compliant, and they only feed the data back to the individual. So it's not a big brother thing, which, and they're walking a very fine line there because they're capturing it. And I think you're going to start seeing them expose more, to the individual to empower you in all of the Office 365 tools. And that's coming, as I said, almost weekly. And so certainly that's going to be the path and, ramping up in 2020.
Yeah, certainly have to agree there, Kevin. If we're going to see it, we're going to see it from Microsoft probably first, at the rate of knots they are developing their platforms. So, John, finally, what do you think?
Yeah, so in terms of expect to see, I expect to hear the vendors will just keep beating the AI drum and messaging louder and louder. What I think they should be doing is not talking about AI at all and just focusing on the successes and benefits that are happening because they're having AI driven, AI powered applications and platforms. Focus more on, they should be, I think, focusing more on the outcomes and the business value of it, because the expectations that come with AI are so loaded, either that it's the silver bullet, that it's a big brother thing, it's going to kill our jobs, it's going to be depersonalized. So I think they really need to, the messaging I think needs to be stronger about the good things. Like as Kevin says, I mean, Cisco's trying to do the same thing. When you look at the good outcomes that they can deliver that couldn't have been done before, they're really cool. And I think if people just start getting used to it and experiencing it, and also it drives from what they see in the consumer world too, then I think there's some value. For example, IBM had a really good application called Moments, where everyone is drowning in email, too much information to manage. And what that does is it uses AI to cull the most important things of your day in terms of all the messages you got to manage, and it helps you prioritize and say, hey, here are the 10 most important emails you need to respond to today. And because you may not even have gotten to your half of your messages by the time the day is done. So that's a good use of AI to say, hey, how can I make my workflow more manageable? People get that when they see it. They don't have to know that it's AI, right? And I think hand in hand with that too, I think Zeus alluded to this, I think they have to set expectations more realistically to the end users about what's happening with their data. How is it being used? Who sees it? What are the privacy implications? So I think developing better governance and usage policies, I think the vendors can go a long way in helping setting expectations for that, because that's going to provide a comfort level with both end users and IT to deploy this stuff. Because it's one thing to deploy it, it's another thing to use it and get value out of it. And if end users just think, the workers just think it's being AI just for the benefit of management and IT and not them, they're going to push back. They're going to find ways to work around it, all that kind of thing. So there's potential here for AI to kind of work against itself if it's not handled properly. So the vendors have a big role to play there, but it's going to be good no matter what we think is going to happen, as long as they play their cards right and not just push it down our throats.
I actually do agree with John on that point. I think there's been too much marketing of AI, and marketing AI is a little weird because it's just, machine learning is just a way of analyzing data. It's a little bit like marketing math or
It's
something.
not new.
Well, and actually we saw it too in the area. Remember when IoT was new, everything was smart this, smart that, or whatever. We don't put that acronym in front of it anymore because we just know everything is connected, right? So, and frankly, being connected didn't make it smart, it just made it connected. But we kind of dropped that now, and because we just assume now things are connected. And I think eventually AI will become so pervasive, right, and used as a way to analyze data, that we'll stop marketing it and we'll just talk about the things you can do. And so right now we're so early in the cycle that I understand why the vendors are doing it, but it is a little strange to market it because it's a way of analyzing data. It's like I said, it's like trying to market math or something, which you don't.
That is good.
Yeah.
It is a very good point. Yeah, very good point. But this session is labeled AI powered communication, so I apologize.
It's going to be
and we are early enough in it that I think it's important that people understand what is real and what's not. And one of the more common questions I get is from users is, how do I know it's AI? Right? And because there's lots of rules-based system out there, and I think the key is it gets better over time. And I think from a user expectation standpoint, Rob, I think sometimes we expect AI to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to get us going, and then the data that is created from it, good or bad, gets fed back in as learning systems. And so the barrier to entry, even in contact center and things, should just be better than people, right? And that's not perfect at all. But once you're over that barrier of better than people, then it will get better and better over time. And so don't expect perfection, but do expect it to get better over time.
Great. That's a really good point, and a great place to finish. So this has been a fascinating session, gents. Thank you very much for your time today. I wish you all the best for 2020, and I'm sure we're going to see lots more from the vendor landscape, and very excited to look forward into the industry. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, you're
Thank you, guys.
welcome.